In August 2025, a photograph appeared in a local Facebook community group near Flagstaff, Arizona. At first, it looked like the kind of post people scrolled past every day. A young woman, no identification, no phone, no wallet, no idea who she was. The caption was simple. A woman had been found at a truck stop diner near Interstate 40. She appeared confused and unable to identify herself. If anyone recognized her, they were asked to contact local authorities. Most people assumed it would be resolved within hours. Someone would recognize her. A family member would call. A missing person report would surface. Life would move on. But the woman in the photograph carried a secret that stretched back more than a decade. She sat inside a small diner used mostly by long-haul truck drivers and travelers crossing northern Arizona. Doctors would later confirm she was suffering from retrograde amnesia caused by a significant head injury. At that moment, however, nobody knew what had happened to her. She could not remember her name. She could not remember where she lived. She could not remember what year it was. The only thing that felt familiar was a tiny faded tattoo hidden behind her right ear. M+J. 2014. Those 4 characters were the only surviving piece of a life she could no longer reach. The woman who posted the photograph was Patricia Morgan. At 58 years old, Patricia had spent more than a decade managing morning shifts at the diner. She had seen people at their best and their worst. She had seen exhausted truckers, stranded families, travelers dealing with bad news, and teenagers running from problems they believed could be left behind on the highway. But this felt different. This wasn't someone trying to disappear. This was someone who had already been erased. Patricia couldn't explain why that feeling stayed with her all morning. She only knew that the young woman seemed completely disconnected from herself. No fear, no anger, no clear understanding of why she was there, only a strange emptiness. By 9 o'clock that morning, Patricia posted the photograph online. She expected a local answer. Instead, she unknowingly reopened one of New Mexico's oldest unresolved missing person cases. More than 11 years earlier, hundreds of miles away in Albuquerque, 16-year-old Madison Turner had been living a completely ordinary life. Nothing about Madison suggested tragedy. She attended a public high school. Her grades were respectable. She enjoyed English classes. She struggled through chemistry. She maintained a small circle of close friends. She spent weekends talking about college, driver's licenses, future plans, and everything else that occupied the minds of American teenagers trying to imagine adulthood. Her family was not wealthy, but they were close. Her mother, Rachel Turner, worked 2 jobs to support the household. Money was often tight. Time was limited. Stress sometimes filled the gaps between responsibilities. Still, there was stability. There was routine. There was love. Madison understood how hard her mother worked. Rachel understood that her daughter was growing up. Like many mothers and daughters, they disagreed occasionally, but there was no major conflict inside the home. No crisis. No secret plan to leave. No signs that Madison wanted to disappear. There was also someone important in her life. A boy named Jason Miller. For Madison, Jason represented the certainty and intensity of first love. During the summer of 2014, she made a decision that felt meaningful at 16 years old. She created a small tattoo behind her right ear. M+J. 2014. A permanent reminder of feelings she believed would last forever. Her friends knew about it. Jason knew about it. The tattoo became one of those tiny details teenagers rarely think about again. Years later, it would become the key that unlocked an impossible mystery. The final week of August 2014 passed like every other week of Madison's life. School had started again. Assignments were beginning to pile up. Football season was approaching. Students filled social media with plans for the upcoming weekends. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that a countdown had already begun. On September 5, 2014, Madison told her mother she would be spending the evening at the home of her friend Kayla Brooks. That part was true. What Rachel did not know was that Kayla's parents were out of town. A small gathering had been organized. Not a dangerous party. Not the kind of event that would immediately alarm parents. Just a house full of teenagers enjoying a rare evening without adult supervision. Music, food, conversations, friends moving from room to room. The atmosphere everyone would later describe as normal. Madison arrived during the evening. Multiple people remembered seeing her. Every account matched. She seemed relaxed. She seemed happy. She seemed completely ordinary. At various points throughout the night, she exchanged messages with Jason. Nothing unusual appeared in those conversations. Nothing suggested fear. Nothing suggested trouble. Nothing suggested that her life was only hours away from changing forever. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning on September 6, 2014, Madison left through the back door of the house. Several people remembered seeing her. Nobody paid much attention. Nobody considered the moment important. Teenagers stepped outside all the time. People moved between rooms and conversations throughout the night. No one expected that the next few minutes would become the center of an 11-year mystery. Madison Turner disappeared into the darkness beyond that door. She never returned to the party. She never returned home. And without realizing it, everyone connected to her life had just entered a story that would not end until a forgotten photograph appeared on Facebook more than a decade later. By 7 o'clock on the morning of September 6, 2014, Rachel Turner knew something was wrong. Madison had not returned home. There had been no message explaining a change of plans. No missed call during the night. No casual text about staying late. Rachel dialed her daughter's number more than once. The calls went unanswered. At first, Rachel told herself what most parents tell themselves in those early hours. Teenagers lost track of time. Phones died. Sleepovers shifted into morning breakfasts. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing permanent. By 8:30, that reassurance began to thin. Rachel contacted Kayla Brooks. Kayla sounded confused and half awake. She confirmed Madison had been at the gathering. She confirmed Madison had stepped outside at some point during the night. She assumed Madison had gone home. That assumption fractured everything. Rachel's mind moved quickly through possibilities. Car breakdown. A forgotten ride. A misplaced phone. She called Jason Miller next. Jason confirmed the final message he had received from Madison shortly after 1 in the morning. There had been nothing alarming in it. No hint of distress. No coded warning. Just a brief note that she was stepping outside. That message became the final digital trace of Madison Turner. At 9:47 a.m., Rachel contacted the Albuquerque Police Department. The officer who answered the call followed protocol. Madison was 16. Teenagers occasionally left without notice. It had been less than 12 hours. A report could be taken, but immediate mobilization required additional indicators. There were procedures, waiting periods, standard operating guidelines. Rachel heard every word. She refused to accept any of them. By midday, she had already begun calling Madison's friends directly. She checked the usual places. She contacted relatives. She revisited the timeline over and over in her mind, searching for something she might have missed. The official missing person report was filed later that afternoon. The case entered the system under Madison Turner, age 16, last seen September 6, 2014, at approximately 1:10 a.m. The first week moved with frantic momentum. Officers interviewed attendees from the gathering. Everyone provided similar accounts. Madison appeared normal. She did not seem intoxicated. She did not appear distressed. She left briefly and did not return. No one reported a confrontation. No one reported a struggle. Her phone records were subpoenaed. The final tower ping placed her device within range of Kayla's neighborhood shortly after her last text message. After that, the phone went dark. No further signals. No activity. No data. 2 explanations were considered immediately. The phone had been powered off, or the phone had been destroyed. Neither possibility offered comfort. Rachel's home shifted into a command center of sorts. Flyers were printed and distributed across Albuquerque. Schools posted notices. Local businesses taped Madison's photo near their entrances. Social media filled with shares and reposts. Her classmates organized online groups dedicated to bringing her home. Local news stations ran short segments during evening broadcasts. A school portrait from the previous year appeared on screens across the city. The image showed a young girl halfway between childhood and adulthood, careful and hopeful at the same time. Rachel watched that broadcast without blinking. The second week of the investigation widened outward. The New Mexico State Police reviewed the case. Highway patrol officers were notified. Major routes leaving Albuquerque were flagged for any relevant reports. Interstate corridors were checked for surveillance footage, though few cameras offered angles useful enough to capture anything meaningful. Nothing surfaced. Jason Miller was interviewed extensively. His alibi held. Multiple individuals confirmed his presence at the gathering well past the time Madison disappeared. Investigators found no evidence tying him to her absence. Rumors circulated anyway. In missing person cases involving teenagers, speculation spreads faster than facts. Some suggested she ran away. Others whispered about secret arguments at home. Anonymous online comments proposed theories with no foundation in evidence. Rachel rejected them all. She knew her daughter. Madison had plans. She had library books due back at school. She had talked about driver's education. She had talked about college applications. She had talked about saving money for the future. None of those conversations sounded like someone preparing to vanish. By October 2014, the urgency began to shift. Investigations often start loud and visible. Patrol cars, interviews, community searches. After weeks without breakthroughs, they become quieter. The case file remained open, but fewer resources were assigned daily. There were other calls, other emergencies, other crises competing for attention. Rachel felt that shift immediately. She responded by intensifying her own efforts. She built a website dedicated to Madison's disappearance. She contacted national organizations focused on missing and exploited children. She submitted Madison's information to federal databases. She learned terminology she never expected to know: NCIC entries, Amber criteria, interstate coordination. Every morning began with checking emails. Every evening ended with scanning tips that led nowhere. Months turned into a year. The anniversary of September 6th arrived like a weight pressing down on everything inside the house. Noah, who had been 7 when Madison disappeared, began asking different kinds of questions. Questions about probability. Questions about safety. Questions Rachel struggled to answer honestly. Time moved forward even when hope felt suspended. The second year passed. Then the third. Madison's case entered what investigators sometimes call a cold phase. Not officially closed, not forgotten, but no longer urgent in the eyes of the system. Rachel never allowed herself that distance. She paid annual fees to keep certain records active. She refreshed the website with the same photograph. She responded to strangers who reached out with similar stories. The absence became permanent in daily life. But it never became normal. What Rachel did not know during those early months was that Madison had not chosen to disappear. She had not walked away from her life. She had been removed from it. That truth remained hidden far beyond Albuquerque, carried along highways that crossed state lines and vanished into a system designed to operate without visibility. In the fall of 2014, while Rachel stood in front of cameras asking for help, Madison Turner was already moving farther from home than anyone could imagine. The investigation at that point had no evidence of trafficking. No confirmed witnesses placing Madison beyond her neighborhood. No surveillance footage showing a vehicle. Only silence. Silence from a phone that would never ring again. Silence from a daughter who had stepped outside for a moment and never returned. And the beginning of a waiting period that would stretch 11 years into the future. By the beginning of 2015, Madison Turner's name had settled into the long list of missing teenagers in the United States. Her case remained technically open. It existed inside national databases, carried a file number, carried a photograph. It carried dates and timestamps. but it no longer carried daily urgency. For Rachel Turner, urgency never left. The second year after Madison's disappearance reshaped the household in ways that were both quiet and permanent. The bedroom remained untouched. School papers stayed where they had been left. A calendar from 2014 hung longer than it should have. Rachel refused to dismantle the last version of her daughter's ordinary life. She learned how the system worked. She learned how many missing teenagers were categorized as runaways before evidence suggested otherwise. She learned how quickly attention faded when there were no immediate signs of violence. She learned that missing person cases often relied on family persistence to stay visible. Rachel contacted advocacy groups across New Mexico and neighboring states. She spoke with nonprofit organizations specializing in trafficking awareness. She submitted Madison's information to national tip lines that focused on missing and exploited children. Each form required the same details: height, weight, eye color, last known clothing, distinguishing marks. One of those distinguishing marks was listed carefully. Small tattoo behind the right ear. M+J 2014. At the time, that detail felt like a painful reminder of a teenage decision. Later, it would become something else entirely. Noah grew up alongside the investigation. He turned 8, then 9, then 10. Every school year began with teachers who knew his sister's story. Some spoke about it gently. Some avoided it. Friends asked fewer questions as time passed. The world around Noah adjusted to Madison's absence more easily than he ever could. By the fourth year, Rachel's search shifted from frantic outreach to disciplined endurance. She updated Madison's age progression image. She attended local conferences about human trafficking. She listened to law enforcement briefings that described networks operating across interstate corridors. She began to understand something she had never wanted to consider. Some disappearances did not begin with a scream or a public abduction. Some began quietly in ordinary neighborhoods during ordinary nights. In the background of Rachel's learning, Madison's life continued in a place no one in Albuquerque could see. Years later, federal investigators would reconstruct fragments of what happened after September 6, 2014. Not from Madison's memory at first, but from records, financial trails, vehicle movements, and eventually testimony from individuals inside the network. The pattern was consistent with organized trafficking routes across the Southwest and Midwest. Young people identified at vulnerable moments. Transportation arranged quickly. Movement across state lines to avoid local detection. Isolation. Dependency. Frequent relocation. The system did not operate under one name or one leader. It functioned more like an infrastructure, connecting drivers, temporary housing sites, and intermediaries who ensured that no one person appeared responsible for the entire chain. Madison Turner entered that system within hours of leaving Kayla's house. Investigators would later believe that someone connected to the gathering had identified her as vulnerable. Whether that vulnerability came from emotional trust, manipulation, or something introduced without her knowledge remained unclear even years later. What became clear was this: she did not leave Albuquerque voluntarily. She was moved. The first transfers occurred quickly. Phones were taken. Identities were stripped. Names were replaced. By the time law enforcement in New Mexico expanded its search radius beyond the city, Madison was no longer in the state. Her trajectory followed major interstate routes. I-40, I-25, I-35, highways that thousands of Americans used daily without noticing the invisible commerce moving alongside them. The longer she remained inside that system, the more distance formed between who she had been and who she was required to become. The process was gradual. No single moment erased her identity. Instead, erosion happened in increments. Days blended together. Locations changed. Faces changed. Expectations shifted. Communication with the outside world disappeared entirely. Rachel's website remained active through all of it. Year 5 passed, then 6, then 7. Rachel renewed hosting fees. She responded to emails that offered sympathy but no information. She kept Madison's driver's permit paperwork in a folder inside the kitchen drawer. She refused to categorize her daughter as deceased. Public interest rose briefly on each anniversary, then receded again. Inside the system that held Madison, time functioned differently. Birthdays arrived without acknowledgement. Milestones occurred without recognition. The 16-year-old who had believed in permanent summer love matured under circumstances that offered no safety and no control. The tattoo behind her right ear remained. Small, faded, still legible. In a life where everything else was temporary, that ink endured. By 2020, national conversations about trafficking had intensified. Federal agencies expanded task forces. Nonprofits increased awareness campaigns. Yet networks continued adapting. They shifted routes. They changed logistics. They exploited the anonymity of highways and legitimate freight operations. Madison's file in Albuquerque remained open but inactive. Occasional tips arrived and were investigated. None led anywhere substantial. Leads dried up as years passed. Rachel refused to let the silence define the outcome. She believed that if Madison was alive, she was somewhere within the United States. She believed that the absence of a body meant the presence of hope. Noah graduated high school without his sister in the audience. Rachel attended alone. Her grief no longer erupted daily. It settled instead into something steadier and more complex. A constant awareness that somewhere beyond state lines, her daughter existed in a version of reality she could not reach. By the 10th anniversary in 2024, Madison Turner's disappearance had become part of local history in Albuquerque. New officers entering the department learned about the case from archived files. Older detectives remembered the early interviews. No breakthroughs had ever emerged. What no one knew during those 10 years was that a single unpredictable event could undo everything. In the summer of 2025, an incident along Interstate 40 would fracture the routine of the network that had carried Madison across multiple states. Until that moment, the system had operated with precision. Until that moment, Madison had remained invisible. The erosion of her identity had not been complete, but it had been relentless. And yet, even after 11 years, one fragment of who she once was still existed. Not in memory, not in documentation, but behind her right ear. M+J 2014, a mark created by a 16-year-old who believed in permanence. A mark that would soon become the only bridge between a lost identity and the life that had never stopped waiting for her. In the summer of 2025, the system that had operated without interruption for more than a decade made a mistake. The details would later be disputed in federal court. Some described it as mechanical failure. Others suggested human error. What investigators would eventually confirm was simpler and more consequential. Something went wrong during transport along Interstate 40 in northern Arizona. For 11 years, Madison Turner had been moved across state lines with precision. Routes were calculated. Stops were brief. Transfers were controlled. Drivers operated within a structure designed to avoid detection. Deliveries were completed without witnesses. There was rarely deviation. That pattern fractured sometime during the second week of August 2025. The man later identified as one of the transport drivers had been part of the network for years. He was not its architect. He was not a leader. He was logistics. He moved cargo across states. Sometimes that cargo included human beings whose identities had already been stripped away. Investigators would later review his record and determine he had completed multiple cross-state routes tied to trafficking operations. He had followed procedures. He had maintained silence. He had never drawn attention. Until that day. Whatever occurred along that stretch of highway ended with Madison no longer inside the controlled chain of movement. Instead of arriving at a designated transfer point, she was left near an exit outside Flagstaff. Not delivered. Not handed off. Left. By the time a passing motorist noticed her presence and alerted authorities, Madison was already suffering from the effects of a significant head injury. The impact, whether caused by an incident inside the vehicle or by what followed afterward, had triggered retrograde amnesia. She did not know her name. She did not know her age. She did not know the year. She did not know how long she had been on that highway. The only remaining constant was the tattoo behind her right ear. M+J 2014. Emergency services transported her to a hospital in Flagstaff. Medical staff confirmed a concussion and documented additional signs suggesting previous untreated trauma. None of it provided immediate answers about her identity. She was registered as Jane Doe. Law enforcement from Coconino County Sheriff's Office took an initial statement. The statement contained almost nothing usable. She could not identify family members. She could not provide a home address. She could not recognize the state she was in. She knew only that the letters behind her ear felt important. At the truck stop diner near the interstate, Patricia Morgan remained unsettled by the encounter. Patricia had seen people arrive in distress before, but something about the woman's emptiness stayed with her. It did not feel temporary. Felt erased. That feeling prompted the Facebook post. The image was clear. Fluorescent lighting from the diner illuminated her face. The angle captured the faint tattoo behind her right ear. Within hours, the post circulated beyond northern Arizona. Local community members shared it first, then friends of friends, then adjacent groups across state lines. The internet rarely respects geographic boundaries. By mid-afternoon, the image had traveled east into New Mexico. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Madison underwent neurological evaluation. Physicians explained that retrograde amnesia sometimes followed traumatic brain injury. Memory loss could be temporary, could be partial. It could last days, months, or remain incomplete indefinitely. Without identification, her case remained local. Without identification, no one connected her to an 11-year-old missing person file hundreds of miles away. Back in Albuquerque, Rachel Turner was finishing a work shift when her phone buzzed with a message from an acquaintance who still followed missing person groups online. The message contained a link. Rachel almost ignored it. Over the years, she had received dozens of false leads. Women who resembled Madison. Age-progressed photos that created brief waves of hope. Each one had ended the same way. But this message contained something different. A screenshot of a Facebook post from Arizona. A young woman found near Flagstaff. Memory loss. No identification. Rachel opened the image. For several seconds, nothing registered. The woman in the photograph looked older, harder, weathered by years Rachel could not see. Then she noticed the side of her head. The faint ink behind the right ear. M+J 2014. Rachel's breathing shifted into something unsteady but controlled. She did not allow herself immediate belief. She had learned caution over 11 years. Instead, she began cross-checking details. Date found, August 2025. Location, near Interstate 40. Approximate age, mid to late 20s. Madison would have been 27. Rachel contacted the Albuquerque Police Department and referenced the Facebook post. The information was forwarded through official channels. Within hours, it reached federal authorities already monitoring interstate trafficking patterns. Special Agent Sarah Bennett of the FBI had reviewed Madison Turner's file years earlier as part of a broader cold case assessment involving possible trafficking routes across the Southwest. When the Arizona image crossed her desk that evening, she reopened the file. The tattoo description matched exactly. Small lettering behind the right ear. M+J 2014. Recorded in 2014 interviews with Madison's friends. Recorded in the initial missing person documentation. Sarah compared the archived high school photograph with the new image from Flagstaff. 11 years had changed facial structure subtly, but key features aligned. Age progression projections created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children matched the general appearance. The geographic corridor aligned as well. Interstate 40 connected New Mexico and Arizona directly. Sarah did not allow optimism to override protocol. She contacted Coconino County authorities and requested biometric comparison. An expedited DNA sample would be necessary. Back in Flagstaff, Madison remained under observation. The hospital's social worker explained that authorities were attempting to determine her identity. She processed the information without emotional reaction. The past existed as a blank field. But the letters behind her ear continued to feel significant. In Albuquerque, Rachel prepared for a possibility she had imagined for more than a decade. Not certainty, possibility. 11 years of silence had trained her to expect disappointment. But for the first time since 2014, the silence had cracked. The chain of invisibility that had carried Madison across multiple states had broken on a single stretch of highway. And a photograph taken in a diner near Interstate 40 had begun pulling the truth back into the light. By late afternoon, the photograph had traveled farther than anyone in Flagstaff expected. Kayla Brooks had not searched for Madison every day for 11 years. Life had moved forward in visible ways. She had graduated college, built a career as a dental hygienist, relocated within Albuquerque. But September 6th had never become an ordinary date for her. It remained fixed in memory as the night everything shifted. She had seen Madison step outside. She had assumed she would return. That assumption had lived with her for over a decade. When Kayla encountered the image circulating online in August 2025, she nearly dismissed it. The woman in the photo appeared older. Time had changed the face. Hardship had altered the expression. But the detail behind the right ear stopped her. M+J 2014. Kayla did not need confirmation from anyone else. She remembered the summer afternoon Madison had shown the tattoo to their small group of friends. It had been a bold gesture, half romantic, half impulsive. They had teased her about permanence. She had defended it with conviction. The lettering in the Facebook image matched the shape and placement exactly. Kayla contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children hotline. She referenced Madison Turner's case file number. She attached the screenshot. She described the tattoo and the year it had been created. Her voice remained steady. The weight behind it did not. The report was forwarded to the FBI field office responsible for interstate trafficking investigations across Arizona and New Mexico. Special Agent Sarah Bennett received the update before midnight. She had already reviewed the Arizona image earlier that evening. Kayla's call added something crucial. Direct confirmation from someone who had seen the tattoo in 2014. Not speculation. Not resemblance. Specific recognition. Sarah reopened Madison Turner's file fully. Missing since September 6, 2014. Last known location: Albuquerque, New Mexico. Distinguishing mark: small tattoo behind right ear, M+J 2014. The record from 2014 included interviews conducted during the first week of the investigation. Kayla's statement from that time mentioned the tattoo specifically. So did Jason Miller's. The detail had been entered into the national database, but over the years it had remained just another descriptor in a long list of identifiers. Now it was the only concrete bridge between a missing teenager and a hospitalized Jane Doe in Arizona. Sarah requested expedited DNA comparison authorization. She coordinated with Coconino County Sheriff's Office to ensure a sample would be collected properly and transferred under chain of custody protocol. She alerted federal supervisors that the case might involve interstate trafficking, given the geographic pattern emerging along Interstate 40. Meanwhile, Madison remained under hospital care without awareness of the machinery moving around her. She understood only fragments. She knew medical professionals were trying to determine who she was. She knew law enforcement had taken her fingerprints. She knew her memory remained inaccessible. The letters behind her ear felt significant but meaningless at the same time. M+J 2014. She did not remember writing them. She did not remember why they existed. But she knew they belonged to her. In Albuquerque, Rachel Turner spoke directly with federal authorities for the first time in years. The tone of the conversation differed from earlier updates she had received. This time there was caution but also momentum. Rachel provided a voluntary DNA sample immediately. The Turner family records were already archived in connection with the 2014 case. Still, confirmation required current verification. Noah listened quietly during the call. He had been 7 years old when his sister vanished. He was 18 now, old enough to understand probability. old enough to recognize how fragile hope could be. But he also understood something else. The tattoo detail had never been widely publicized beyond early investigative records. It was not a common design. It was specific. Rachel reviewed the image again that night. The woman in the photograph did not look like the 16-year-old who had left for Kayla's house. 11 years had reshaped her. But Rachel did not focus on resemblance alone. She focused on possibility. The timeline aligned. Madison would have been 27 in 2025. The geographic corridor aligned. Interstate 40 connected Albuquerque to Flagstaff directly. The tattoo aligned exactly. Rachel allowed herself one controlled thought. If this was her daughter, then Madison had survived. In Flagstaff, Sarah Bennett arrived in person the following morning. She reviewed medical documentation. She confirmed the concussion diagnosis. She confirmed the retrograde amnesia assessment. She confirmed that no identification had been found among Madison's belongings. Sarah requested a private meeting with the unidentified woman. The introduction was careful and procedural. She explained that authorities were investigating a potential connection to a long-term missing person case out of New Mexico. She clarified that confirmation would depend on DNA results, not assumption. The woman listened without visible recognition. The name Madison Turner produced no immediate reaction. The city of Albuquerque produced none. The year 2014 produced none. Only when Sarah referenced the tattoo did a subtle shift register. The woman understood that the letters mattered. She did not know why. DNA collection occurred under federal supervision. The sample was prioritized through forensic channels. Results were projected within 48 to 72 hours. While waiting, Sarah coordinated with FBI analysts examining interstate freight movement data along Interstate 40. Automated license plate recognition cameras at way stations and commercial hubs provided partial vehicle tracking. The goal was to reconstruct transport patterns consistent with trafficking routes over the past decade. The Arizona incident had interrupted a system that relied on invisibility. That interruption created vulnerability. If the unidentified woman was Madison Turner, then a network had operated undetected for 11 years. And if a driver had left her near Flagstaff, something within that network had failed. Rachel and Noah prepared to travel to Arizona. They understood the possibility of disappointment. But they also understood something unprecedented had occurred. For 11 years, there had been silence. Now there was evidence. Now there was motion. Now there was a woman in a hospital whose life had intersected with theirs on a specific night in September 2014. Rachel did not allow herself certainty. But for the first time in more than a decade, she no longer felt alone in the waiting. The system that had erased Madison Turner was beginning to expose itself. And the smallest detail, a faded tattoo behind the right ear, had become the thread pulling the entire structure toward daylight. By early morning, the investigation had moved beyond speculation. The DNA sample collected in Flagstaff was placed on an expedited track. Federal authorization accelerated processing through forensic laboratories accustomed to handling interstate cases. Rachel Turner's comparison sample was already en route from Albuquerque. While laboratory analysts worked against the clock, Special Agent Sarah Bennett widened the scope. The moment the case involved potential trafficking across state lines, jurisdiction expanded. The FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force in Phoenix was notified. Coordination extended to New Mexico and Texas offices. The possibility that Madison Turner had been transported repeatedly along Interstate 40 shifted the case from a missing person file into a federal criminal investigation. In the hospital, the unidentified woman remained unaware of the operational shift unfolding around her. Medical evaluations continued. The concussion diagnosis was clear. Imaging confirmed trauma consistent with a recent impact. There were also signs suggesting prior injuries that had not been treated in traditional healthcare systems. That detail alone raised serious questions. She still could not recall her name. She still could not recognize Albuquerque. She still could not attach meaning to 2014. But something inside her responded when authorities mentioned that someone might be looking for her. She processed the information carefully, as if evaluating whether it was safe to believe. In Albuquerque, Rachel and Noah prepared for a 14-hour drive to Flagstaff. Rachel did not allow herself to rehearse a reunion. 11 years had taught her discipline. She focused on logistics, identification documents, contact numbers, case file references. Everything remained procedural. Noah understood that the drive could end in confirmation or collapse. But neither of them hesitated. They left New Mexico before sunrise. While they traveled west along Interstate 40, the same corridor that investigators now believed had carried Madison repeatedly across state lines, analysts began reviewing commercial freight data tied to the date of the Arizona incident. Automated license plate recognition systems at way stations provided partial movement patterns for refrigerated trucks and long-haul carriers operating through northern Arizona during the previous 48 hours. One vehicle appeared repeatedly in time frames that aligned with the estimated window of Madison's abandonment. The registration traced back to a small logistics company in Missouri. The company itself did not raise immediate suspicion. Its operations included legitimate freight routes across multiple states. But deeper review indicated irregularities in route consistency over the past 7 years. Certain trips lacked corresponding commercial invoices. Certain stops did not match declared delivery destinations. Patterns began to form. Meanwhile, the DNA analysis progressed. 41 hours after collection, preliminary results returned. The unidentified woman in Flagstaff shared a biological match with Rachel Turner at a statistical probability exceeding 99.99%. Confirmation was formalized shortly afterward. Jane Doe was Madison Turner. Alive. 27 years old. Found August 2025 in Arizona. Missing since September 6, 2014. Sarah Bennett made the call directly to Rachel's mobile phone as the car crossed into Arizona. Rachel listened without interrupting. The confirmation did not erase 11 years of fear. It did not fill the empty space those years had created. But it altered the narrative permanently. Madison was no longer a cold case. She was a living victim of an active federal crime. When Rachel and Noah arrived at the hospital, authorities had already briefed them on what to expect. Madison's memory loss remained significant. Recognition was uncertain. Emotional reaction was unpredictable. Rachel understood that reunion did not guarantee restoration. She had prepared herself for the possibility that her daughter might not recognize her at all. Inside the hospital room, Madison had been informed that family members were on their way. She accepted the information quietly. It did not ignite recognition. It did not trigger memory. But something about the word family lingered. When Rachel entered the room, the moment did not resemble the dramatic reunions often shown in media. There was no sudden recollection. No immediate restoration of identity. Madison looked at the woman in front of her without recognition. Rachel did not force introduction. She did not rush explanation. Instead, she brought something older than memory. A melody. A simple sequence of notes that had existed in their household long before adolescence, long before high school, long before 2014. It was a lullaby Rachel had used when Madison was an infant. Not a song found on recordings. Not a melody documented anywhere. Just a family pattern passed down without formal origin. Madison did not remember her childhood. She did not remember the bedroom in Albuquerque. She did not remember the night she disappeared. But when Rachel carried that melody into the room, something inside Madison shifted. Recognition did not surface in words. It surfaced in continuation. 3 notes completed a pattern that only 2 people in the room had ever known. The moment did not unlock everything, but it broke something open. Rachel understood that identity sometimes lives below conscious memory. The following hours unfolded in measured stages. Noah introduced himself carefully. He described shared childhood experiences without overwhelming her. Madison listened as if assembling fragments from someone else's life. DNA confirmation gave law enforcement the authority to expand the investigation fully. The refrigerated truck identified through license plate data became a priority target. Surveillance review across 6 states reconstructed a partial movement map spanning several years. The vehicle's route frequency suggested repeated cross-country transport along predictable corridors. 11 days after Madison was identified, federal agents located the driver in Wichita, Kansas. He did not attempt to flee. Under interrogation, he acknowledged involvement in a transport network operating between New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. He described his role as logistical support, moving individuals between predetermined transfer points. He admitted that something had gone wrong during the August 2025 transport. He confirmed leaving Madison near an exit along Interstate 40. He did not characterize the decision as rescue. Prosecutors would later describe it as abandonment. Regardless of motive, that decision disrupted an 11-year chain. The driver's cooperation led to additional arrests over the following months. 7 individuals connected to trafficking operations across multiple states were taken into federal custody. The network, while not entirely dismantled, suffered significant disruption. For Madison, the legal progress existed parallel to her recovery. She remained under neurological supervision. Memory returned slowly and unevenly. Some fragments surfaced without context. Others remained inaccessible. But one fact remained undeniable. She had survived. Rachel and Noah began reconstructing connection through patience rather than urgency. Madison did not remember the girl who left a party in September 2014, but she began recognizing pieces of herself through those around her. The system that had erased her identity had failed at the most critical point. It had failed to erase her entirely. And now, with confirmation in hand and a federal case expanding across state lines, Madison Turner's story shifted from disappearance to survival. The waiting had ended. The reckoning had begun. The hospital confirmed Madison Turner's identity on a Wednesday morning in August 2025. The DNA match left no uncertainty. 11 years after her disappearance, the missing person file from Albuquerque officially transitioned into a recovery case. The announcement did not come with celebration. It came with precision. Federal authorities issued a brief statement confirming that a woman located in Arizona had been identified as Madison Turner, missing since September 6, 2014. The statement emphasized ongoing investigation into interstate trafficking. It avoided details. It avoided speculation. Across New Mexico, Arizona, and beyond, the story spread quickly. Former classmates saw her name in headlines they had not expected to read again. Community members who had shared flyers in 2014 recognized the photograph beside the announcement. Advocacy groups referenced the case as proof that missing children could still be found years later. For Rachel Turner, none of the public attention mattered as much as a single fact. Her daughter was alive. The days following confirmation unfolded with care. Madison's medical team focused on stabilization and neurological recovery. They explained that memory restoration after prolonged trauma rarely followed a straight path. There would be gaps. There would be inconsistencies. Some memories might never return fully. Others might surface unexpectedly. Madison processed the information with quiet concentration. She understood the words. She understood the timeline she had been told. But comprehension did not immediately translate into emotional familiarity. Rachel did not rush the process. She brought photographs one at a time. A school picture from sophomore year. A birthday snapshot from before 2014. A candid image of Madison and Noah in their backyard. Each image was presented without pressure. Rachel described them simply, offering context but not overwhelming detail. Madison studied each photograph carefully. She did not recognize her own face in the early images, but she began noticing patterns. A similarity in expressions. A familiarity in posture. A resemblance between herself and the young boy in the photos who was now an adult standing nearby. Noah spoke sparingly. He understood that recovery required space. He shared specific memories, school projects, holiday traditions, small family jokes, but he avoided emotional intensity. He wanted recognition to grow naturally, not from obligation. The lullaby Rachel had introduced during their first meeting continued to serve as a bridge. It resurfaced in quiet moments. Madison could not trace its origin consciously, yet it stirred something internal. Not a full recollection, but a sense of continuity. A thread connecting past and present without demanding immediate explanation. Within 2 weeks, Madison was transferred from the Arizona hospital to a rehabilitation facility in New Mexico. Returning to her home state carried symbolic weight. Interstate 40 had once represented distance and disappearance. Now it represented a path back. The federal investigation intensified simultaneously. The transport driver arrested in Wichita provided substantial information. His cooperation led to additional warrants. Federal agents executed coordinated arrests in Missouri, Texas, and Oklahoma. 7 individuals were taken into custody over the next 18 months. Court filings outlined a network that had exploited transportation infrastructure to move victims quietly across state lines. The filings detailed transfer points, coded communications, and payment systems disguised within legitimate freight transactions. Madison's survival became a central element in the prosecution's narrative. Her abandonment near Flagstaff, originally perceived as a simple incident, became the disruption that exposed the system. For Madison, the legal developments existed as background information. Her primary challenge remained personal reconstruction. By the 3rd week in rehabilitation, fragments of memory began returning in unpredictable sequences. A high school hallway, the smell of her mother's cooking, the rhythm of a particular song playing from a car radio. These fragments did not arrive with chronological order. They surfaced like scattered pieces from a story she was relearning. Her therapists specialized in trauma-informed care. They avoided forcing recall. They focused instead on rebuilding stability. Identity reconstruction, they explained, could be built forward even while the past remained incomplete. Rachel visited every weekend. She maintained consistency. Meals shared. Photographs reviewed. Stories repeated gently. She avoided framing Madison as a victim. Instead, she spoke about resilience, about strength, about survival. Madison began noticing emotional responses before cognitive ones. When Noah mentioned a childhood argument over a video game console, she felt irritation mixed with affection. She could not place the event, but the emotional imprint resonated. When Rachel referenced the first day of high school, Madison sensed nervousness layered over excitement. Again, no visual memory followed, but the emotion felt authentic. Federal authorities continued updating Rachel periodically regarding the case's progress. Prosecutors prepared indictments. The driver's testimony strengthened the structure of the case. Investigators traced transport routes across multiple states, identifying additional victims whose identities were still under review. The system that had held Madison for 11 years was unraveling. Yet Madison herself remained focused on something quieter. Rebuilding. 6 months after her identification, she returned to Albuquerque permanently. Her childhood room remained intact. Rachel had preserved it exactly as it had been left in 2014. Madison entered it not as someone reclaiming a memory, but as someone encountering evidence of a life she was told belonged to her. The familiarity did not arrive immediately, but comfort did. She spent time reviewing old journals and school notebooks. Handwriting matched her own. Marginal notes contained thoughts that felt sincere and distinctly hers. The pages offered glimpses into the girl she had been before September 6, 2014. Gradually, recognition shifted from abstract to personal. She began identifying preferences she had once held. Favorite books, favorite foods, academic interests. She visited her former high school quietly, accompanied by family. The hallways triggered partial recall, more emotional than visual, but enough to suggest continuity. The story that had once ended abruptly in 2014 began to extend forward again. 1 year after her recovery, Madison Turner stood not as a symbol of tragedy but as evidence of endurance. She did not remember every detail of her disappearance. She did not need to. She understood that 11 years had been taken from her. But she also understood something equally important. She had survived those years. She had been found. And in a country where countless missing person cases never reach resolution, her return represented something larger than her own life. It represented the power of persistence, the power of community, the power of a mother who refused to stop waiting, and the fragile, extraordinary reality that sometimes, against every statistical expectation, someone still finds their way home. 1 year after Madison Turner was identified in a hospital in Flagstaff, Arizona, the legal process had moved into a different phase. Arrests had been made across 4 states. Federal indictments detailed a trafficking network that operated quietly along interstate freight routes for years. The transport driver who left Madison near Interstate 40 had entered into a plea agreement. His testimony had helped investigators identify transfer hubs, financial intermediaries, and additional victims whose names were still being confirmed. The prosecutions were ongoing. Court dates were scheduled months apart. Legal language filled documents that would eventually become part of public record. For many families across the Southwest and Midwest, those records would offer clarity that had never arrived before. For Madison, justice existed as something external. Her recovery was internal. The first months back in Albuquerque had been structured around therapy, medical appointments, and gradual reintegration into daily life. Memory did not return all at once. It arrived in fragments, sometimes triggered by photographs, sometimes by routine, sometimes without warning. A backyard birthday party surfaced in pieces. A specific teacher's voice emerged without a face attached to it. The first day she met Jason Miller appeared briefly in her thoughts before dissolving again. Some memories remained out of reach entirely, particularly those surrounding the night of September 6, 2014. Her therapists explained that traumatic memory can be encoded differently. The brain protects itself by sealing certain events behind layers that may never fully open. Madison accepted that explanation. She understood that knowing every detail was not the same as healing. Rachel adjusted alongside her daughter's pace. She no longer measured progress in dramatic breakthroughs. She measured it in smaller markers. Madison recognizing a favorite childhood meal. Madison recalling the layout of a local grocery store. Madison identifying an old family photograph without assistance. Noah adapted as well. He had grown into adulthood in the shadow of absence. Now he was learning how to be a brother again. He offered support without pressing for recognition. When Madison remembered a shared joke from elementary school, he received it without exaggeration. When she could not remember, he accepted that too. The house no longer felt suspended in time. It began to evolve again. 6 months after returning home, Madison enrolled in community college courses. She chose classes deliberately: English composition, psychology, and criminal justice. The decision was not impulsive. It was informed by the years she could not fully remember but knew had reshaped her. Public attention had quieted by then. The initial surge of headlines had faded. Another news cycle had replaced it. Madison preferred it that way. She did not want her identity reduced to a case number or a viral photograph. Still, she agreed to one carefully structured interview arranged through a trafficking prevention organization. The focus was not on the trauma itself. It was on survival and awareness. She spoke about the importance of paying attention to details, about how a single tattoo behind her right ear had bridged 11 years of separation. She did not frame herself as extraordinary. She framed herself as fortunate. Federal agents continued to update Rachel about developments in the case. The network's disruption had resulted in the identification of several additional victims. Some had been recovered. Others remained under investigation. The work was not complete. Madison followed those updates quietly. She understood that her survival had depended on multiple factors aligning at once. An interruption in transport, a passerby noticing something unusual, a diner manager deciding to post a photograph, a friend recognizing a detail most people would have overlooked. None of those events were dramatic on their own. Together, they altered the outcome. By the anniversary of her recovery in August 2026, Madison's life looked steady from the outside. She maintained a part-time job. She attended classes regularly. She continued therapy. She rebuilt friendships selectively. Some former classmates reconnected. Others remained part of a chapter that no longer fit. The tattoo behind her right ear remained unchanged. She considered removing it at one point. The letters represented a 16-year-old version of herself and a relationship that had long since ended. But she chose to keep it. It had become something else. Not a symbol of teenage romance. A marker of continuity. A reminder that even when identity feels erased, some trace of it endures. Rachel no longer checked her phone every hour. She no longer refreshed missing person databases. Instead, she redirected her energy into volunteer work with local support groups for families of the missing. She spoke openly about persistence, not as blind hope, but as disciplined endurance. She understood that not every story ends the way Madison's did. She never presented it as a guarantee. She presented it as proof that silence is not the same as finality. Noah completed his college applications with his sister's input for the first time since childhood. The family adjusted to an ordinary rhythm again. Not the same rhythm as before 2014, but a new one shaped by what they had endured. The federal case would continue through sentencing phases and appeals. Madison might testify in limited capacity, depending on legal strategy. But those proceedings, though significant, did not define the core of her story. Her story was not only about disappearance. It was about return. It was about a mother who refused to stop updating a website. A friend who recognized a detail most people would have ignored. A community member who posted a photograph without knowing its weight. A highway system that carried darkness for years, then inadvertently delivered light. In the United States, thousands of families wake up each day with unanswered questions about someone they love. Statistics often reduce those lives to numbers. Case files categorize them by age, date, and location. News coverage fades quickly. Madison's story reminds people that behind every entry in a database stands a family that has not stopped counting the days. It reminds people that systems built on invisibility can fracture. It reminds people that attention matters. A small decision, a shared image, a recognized mark, a call placed at the right moment, can alter a decade. Madison does not remember every detail of what was taken from her. She does not need to. What she understands now is this: identity is not erased easily. Love does not expire with time. And sometimes, against the weight of probability and silence, someone finds their way back because someone else refused to stop looking. That truth does not undo the years lost. But it insists that even in a country as vast and complex as the United States, connection can still outrun disappearance. And that is reason enough not to look away. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to listen to this story today. In a world that moves quickly and rarely pauses, your willingness to stay, reflect, and care means more than you may realize. Stories like this are not only about loss or survival. They are about endurance, about the quiet strength of families who refuse to give up, and about the invisible threads that connect people even across years of silence. If there is one lesson we can take from this journey, it is this: never underestimate the power of persistence. A single shared image, a small detail remembered, a decision not to stop looking. These moments can change the course of a life. Compassion matters, attention matters, and hope, even when it feels fragile, can carry us farther than we think. Behind every missing name is a family that still waits. Behind every recovery is a chain of ordinary people who chose to care. This story reminds us that even in difficult times, humanity is still capable of connection, courage, and restoration. If this story touched you, moved you, or made you reflect, we would be grateful for your support. You can support our channel simply by pressing like, sharing your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribing so you don't miss future stories. Your engagement helps these voices continue to be heard. Thank you again for being here with us today.